The Application Quality Report communicates availability and end-user performance trends for business-critical applications. The report is often used to provide stakeholders with visibility into performance of third-party web apps, internally hosted applications, or even remote office connections to a data center or other central location. Each application is represented in the report by a predefined list of filtered paths. Paths are then aggregated into locations to summarize application quality from different geographic regions. While commonly run for a single application to compare performance across locations, this report can also be configured to summarize performance across multiple applications. Let's take a quick look at the contents of the report, then at how to configure it. App quality is based on path status and is considered satisfactory or in violation depending on whether the paths meet the performance thresholds set in their alert profiles. Outage and availability are based on whether the paths can connect to their target. For each status summary, we see how reported performance compares to the preceding period. The direction of the arrow indicates if the value increased or decreased, and the color indicates if performance has improved, green, or worsened, red, since the previous period. Monitoring inactive represents the percent of the selected time range where paths in the report were not monitored. This could be due to offline monitoring points or to the inclusion of network paths or web paths that were created partway through the selected time range. In this example, paths were not monitored for 12% of the 7-day report, which works out to be about 1 day. Path performance was satisfactory for around 85% of the remaining 6 days. Next is a performance timeline. Each vertical slice of the timeline shows how much of that time was spent in a satisfactory, violated, or outage state. Then there's a summary for each application in the report, with a timeline for each location. The report is commonly configured to sort by violation duration so that the worst performing locations and paths can be easily identified at a glance and prioritized for remediation. If the report is configured to show the worst performing paths at each location, then these locations can be expanded to see those paths and the violation details. The path name is a link to open the network timeline with detailed performance metrics. One thing to note is that the bar chart for path performance is not a timeline like the other charts. It shows the overall percentage of time the path was in a satisfactory, outage, or violation state. So far we've covered the contents of the application quality report and covered some key concepts. Now let's take a look at how to set up and schedule the report. Before I create the report, though, I'll need to decide on its scope. I'll need to know which application or business service and which locations or offices should be included. Then I'll need to make sure that all the paths exist between the locations and the application. And in order to be an apples-to-apples comparison, those paths should all be targeting the same endpoint. And finally, I'll set up a saved path list that's filtered to include only the paths needed in the report. The easiest way to build this saved list is if all paths belong to the same network path group. I can then use a smart list that filters for all paths in that group. The smart list name is what will appear in the report as the name of the application. As with most delivery reports, this report is composed of a group of sub-reports that can be run together or run individually. The summary is an overview across all applications in the report, while the detail report contains separate overviews for each app, along with visibility into the worst performing locations. In practice, most users configure this report for just one application, and choose the detail report to include locations without the cross-application summary, which is redundant with only one application. For this tutorial, I'll run the full report, but this can always be changed on the next page. When creating a new report, the first step is to select the saved lists that represent each application or service. Let's take a look at how the various report settings will impact the report output. First up is defining the time range for the report. The report can include results collected up to 11:59 p.m. yesterday. To adjust the time range, I can enter a specific date and time, click and drag on the histogram, or use the zoom links to jump to the most recent data or to expand to a specific duration. Including WebPath data will bring in results from experience monitoring. Services will show as violated based on both network conditions like packet loss and jitter, as well as web conditions like HTTP errors. One thing to note when including WebPath data is that connectivity loss on a network path will only be considered an outage if the related web path also loses HTTP connectivity to the target. Here we can control how the various monitoring point locations are grouped, at various geographic levels or by the individual monitoring point. The most specific option groups locations by the most specific geographic location used or the monitoring point name if no location is set. To help prioritize remediation efforts, sort locations by performance violation time to see the worst performing locations at the top of the report. For organizations with hundreds of locations, the report can become too long for easy consumption, so there are a few options to simplify the report. Large organizations tend to define locations at a higher level, summarizing data by state, province, or country. Users can then review the list of worst performing paths for insight into which sites in the region are experiencing issues. I can also limit the number of paths shown for each location. Setting this value to 0 will suppress the path list entirely and only show the overall location performance. Suppressing the path list is useful for shortening the PDF version of this report when sending to business stakeholders who don't need that path level insight. But remember that if the path list is suppressed, the report won't include links to each path's detailed network timeline. Similar to the path limit, I can also limit the report to a set of the worst performing locations. Now that I've updated the report settings, I'll run the report, double check it contains the expected data, and then I can download a PDF of the report. I can also schedule the PDF report to be emailed out on a regular basis. I'll give the schedule a meaningful name. I'll double check and adjust any of the settings if needed, and select a frequency for the report. All reports are delivered at or shortly after midnight based on the time zone of the user who created the report. Then I can optionally customize the PDF file name. If I click in the field, I'll get a list of variables that I can use, and I can also type in freeform text. And then finally, I'll specify who should receive the report. And I can always add additional contacts later. So there you have it. With just a little bit of planning, and in just a few steps, you can use the application quality report to regularly communicate the performance of key business services to stakeholders. Thanks for watching.